Hi, Grandma here, and I'm reading The Golden Goblet, and I'm starting halfway through chapter 13 on page 204 in my book. And Ranofer has followed Gebu and Wenamon and is now currently in a tomb, having tried to follow them. But he realizes that the tomb's entrance that he is in is much too narrow to get a coffin in. And he then realizes it must be a second entrance to the tomb, a secret one. A secret one, of course. He stood transfixed by a flash of understanding. The whole of Gebu's plot was suddenly clear to him. He had heard tales of such tunnels dug out during the construction of a tomb by scheming workers. They would hack through the wall of a tomb chamber secretly and tunnel as far as time allowed toward the surface of the earth, adding the rock chips to the other debris from the excavation of the tomb. The hole in the chamber wall would then be plastered over like the other walls, so that no passage showed at all. A few years or perhaps months later, when the funerary visits of the surviving family become infrequent, they had only to dig a shaft down from the surface to meet their tunnel. When this was done, they could enter the tomb at their leisure and cart away the gold, undetected by the guards at the real entrance, which might be a quarter of a league away, out of sight behind some rocky hillock. Gebu was a stone cutter, Wenamon a mason. They had done this thing. It would be easy for them to arrange it. Ranofer caught his breath as another realization struck him. The little room in the tomb drawing, the one for the Pharaoh's master of storehouses, it was no room at all. It was a passage like this, disguised so that the workmen could hack it out without knowing it was anything but another storage chamber. Small wonder Gebu had flown into a rage when he was asked about it. Ranofer went cold all over with fright as he saw himself calmly pointing to that very place on the drawing, recklessly asking the most dangerous of all questions. It was like crawling straight into a crocodile's jaws, only finding out later that you had done it. Shaken as much by the past danger as by the present one, he huddled beside the crevice, trying to gather his scattered wits. Poor master of storehouses, he thought distractedly. When the old man finally dies, he will not have long to rest. A sudden queer noise made him swing around. What was it? He saw no one, nothing, only the same glaring, lifeless wasteland with its tumbled piles of boulders stretching all around him. His eyes went slowly to the rock pile near at hand, behind which he had hidden a few moments ago. Was something else hidden there now? He edged closer to the crevice, still staring at the rock pile. Once more, even Gebu and Wenamon seemed companions fervently to be desired. At least they were human, and they were alive. But I do not want to go into a tomb, Ranofer thought desperately. I do not want to follow them clear into that dark, awful place. Surely it is enough that I know that they are there. I can run now and give the alarm. Run past the ominous rock pile? Through all that terrible empty valley again? Alone? His flesh crawled. He shrank another step toward the crevice, and as he did so, he heard the sound again. Eerily distinct and close. It was the dry rustling of wings. A cold moisture chilled Ranofer's forehead, as if an icy hand had been laid there. At that moment, a gust of wind swept across the sands. There was a loud clapping and beating, and from behind the rock pile, a huge black form with outstretched wings rose cumbersomely, tilting and flapping directly toward him. With a cry, Ranofer leaped for the crevice and slid feet first into the dark. At dawn, Heqet and the Ancient had arrived at the fish dock, dressed in their best and eager for their day ahead. For a time they talked together, happily admiring each other's finery, teasing, laughing from sheer excitement, and glancing up the thoroughfare from time to see if Ranofer was in sight. "What a lazy clod," Heqet said finally. "Still on the mat, today of all days. Let's go rouse him." "Oh, do you know where he lives?" inquired the ancient. "Nay, I thought you might." "Well, I do not. We'll have to wait." They busied themselves watching more and more holiday makers emerge from houses and side streets as the sky pinkened above. The sound of voices and laughter swelled, and the thoroughfare grew crowded as the inhabitants of the city of the dead streamed into it and hurried toward the ferry landings. Still, Ranofer did not come. Many other boys passed by with their parents and their sisters and their aunts and cousins and grandfathers. Gilded palanquins and chariots preceded by runners and followed by retinues of servants began to appear from the direction of the noblemen's villas. Ferry boats and private barks were now putting out from every dock as fast as they could be loaded. Many had already reached the opposite bank, and others were strung along the river like a gala chain. The two friends waiting on the fish dock began to get restive. When the 7 pennants rose high on the palace wall and the trumpet squealed its joyful signal, Heqet turned impatiently to the ancient. "Surely he will hear that," Heqet said. "Though he be sleeping like a rock, that sound will rouse him. He must come soon." "Aye," the ancient said in a somewhat dubious voice, "but I do not understand why he is not here already." "Well, anyone can oversleep." "On a festival day? An always hungry boy?" Heqet shrugged, but his face was puzzled as he peered down the crowded thoroughfare in the direction of which Ranofer would come. 10 minutes later, the crowds had noticeably diminished as they drained through the thoroughfare into the ferries and sailed across the river. Heqet and the ancient were now frowning and uneasy. "We will miss our ferry," Heqet exclaimed. "They will all be gone soon. Did he not say he would meet us? I know he said it. We spoke of it 100 times. Of course I did not see him after midday yesterday." "I did," said the ancient. "And did he not mention any change of plans?" "Nay, he..." The ancient's face altered suddenly. He turned and stared down the street as if staring alone would make Ranofer appear. "What is wrong, ancient?" Heqet asked anxiously. "Perhaps nothing, perhaps a great deal. Tell me, young one, did he seem distracted when you saw him at midday? Did he act a little strange, as if..." "As if what?" Heqet prompted as the ancient's voice trailed off. "I do not know," the old man admitted. "I know only that when I saw him at Day's Inn, I asked 3 times what ailed him. He was troubled about something, very troubled." "Oh, it was that brother of his, no doubt," Heqet said. "He's always troubled about that brother and his thieving." "Nay, he kept talking about tomb robbers. The ancient broke off with his mouth still open. For a moment, he and Heqet stared aghast at each other. "Tomb robbers," Heqet whispered. "Could he have found out Gebu is a tomb robber?" "He'd found out nothing at all, as far as I know," the ancient said agitatedly. "He told me nothing, but then perhaps he would not." "Surely he would have told you that." "Still, he keeps his thoughts to himself, especially the bad ones, the ones that make him afraid." Heqet's voice trailed off too. "Now what?" "Yesterday at midday, I was telling him something. I had overheard a conversation. I thought he was frightened. But then he spoke so calmly, told me it all meant nothing." The ancient seized his arm. "What conversation? What was it you overheard?" See, swiftly, Heqet repeated the tale of his eavesdropping behind the potter's new-made jars, and what Ranofer had said of it later. When he mentioned the place of the broken tree, the ancient's one eye sharpened suddenly, but he did not interrupt, though his face grew grimmer and paler as he listened. So you see, Heqet finished, it could have nothing to do with Ranofer. Gebu is not even in Thebes today. No doubt those two cursed ones are meeting, but at that place of the tree, and if that is in Abydos, it is not in Abydos, said the ancient softly. I know the place of the broken tree. It is an old landmark, and it is not in Abydos. His bony hand stretched out a finger, pointing toward the western cliffs. It is there, near the summit, on the path to the Valley of the Tombs. As Heqet eyed him in frozen silence, he added, that young one knew it too, or guessed it. He asked me how these thieves were caught, the ones we saw hanging from the palace wall one day. I told him. I told him. What did you tell them? How were they caught? They were followed, straight through the valley and into the tomb. And I told him about it. I'll wager that's where he is this minute, trailing those villains across that place, with never a charm or an amulet to keep the Kefs away. We must go after him, Heqet cried. We can catch him, Ancient. Bring him back. The Ancient was already hobbling down the steps of the fish dock, his one eye fixed on the distant cliffs. We'll catch him if we can. You're too young, and I'm too old for such an adventure, little one, but he's got nobody else. The guards? Puffed Heqet as they ran into the thoroughfare. Feasting yonder, across the river, with everyone else. The Ancient pointed bitterly toward the midstream, where the last crowded ferry boat was bobbing toward the opposite bank. The thoroughfare was deserted. All the streets were deserted, and the shops and houses empty. It really did seem like the city of the dead now. As its outskirts, they were forced to slacken their pace, both with breathless, as much from anxiety as from their haste. The Ancient signaled for a halt, and they stood puffing, the eyes of both following the road along the desert. As soon as their breathing quieted, the Ancient glanced at Heqet and nodded. Without a word, they started toward the western cliffs. Half an hour later, they rounded a bend on the steep, narrow path and saw the strange, stunted tree thrusting out of the cleft in the boulders. Beside it, the path broadened, and Heqet caught up the walk beside Ancient. Together, they topped the last rise and paused, gazing in silence out over the vast red wasteland that spread below. Heqet shivered slightly and moved toward the Ancient until their arms were touching. How can we find him in this place? He whispered. Do you think we can find him, Ancient? I don't know, young one. We must try. I thought we might see him, but I see nothing. Alive? One thing is alive, the old man said grimly. He pointed far across the boulder-strewn sand, where from a distant rock pile a great black vulture at that moment rose clumsily, tilting, flapping, and finally wheeling upward in a soaring glide. When it was high in the air, circling lazily against the blue, the two on the cliff path tore their eyes from it and started downward to the valley floor. So we found out that that big black thing that came after Ranofer was a vulture, and the Ancient and Heqet are close enough that they can that they saw the vulture leave. So maybe that's the direction they're headed. I hope so, because I think Ranofer needs help. Bye-bye.